Welcome back for Chapter 12 of True Colors. Cassie and Michael were able to pull off their secret wedding at their favorite spot at the Great Falls, only to be abruptly separated when duty called Michael away 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Let's see how they navigate married life, being apart from one another.
True Colors, Chapter 12. Life without Michael. As he had warned, I received no letters or messages from him. I followed the newspaper reports more closely than ever, and wondered if and how his work would soon turn the advantage to the northern side. Within days after he left, the Federal Army suffered defeat to General Robert E. Lee in what was called the Battle of the 7 Days. Michael's prediction about Lee being a man to reckon with had certainly come true. In late August, the Union troops under General McClellan and Pope unsuccessfully attacked Lee and Jackson at Bull Run, the very place where Eric had been killed the year before, and where General Jackson earned the nickname Stonewall. After this solid defeat, the beaten Federal troops plodded back to Washington, arriving amidst heavy rains. The threat of a Confederate invasion on the capital seemed not only very real, but imminent. It seemed that these hard times couldn't get any worse. Then came Antietam. In September, Lee invaded Maryland, and on the 17th was fought the bloodiest and most savage battle of the war thus far. The Confederates were finally forced to retreat back to Virginia only after 9,000 of their soldiers and 11,500 Federals were killed or wounded. Over 20,000 men in 12 brutal hours. In the aftermath, the roads leading into Alexandria and Washington were choked with ambulances, stretcher bearers, and walking wounded. Our hospital swelled beyond reckoning with many of these casualties, a great number of whom were members of Pennsylvania regiments, raw recruits who had their baptisms of fire on that day. Even the seasoned veterans were stunned by the chaos and slaughter they witnessed. Hearing their accounts of the human devastation that took place that day, I was sore pressed to dwell on my own loneliness. Once a week, on my way to work, I walked an out-of-the-way route in order to read the latest casualty lists at the courthouse, always fearful of what I might find. I peered over the shoulders of other anxious wives, fathers, mothers, relatives, and friends of the fighting men. Some became hysterical when they saw the name of their loved one. Others left with silent tears. Still others hugged each other in relief at finding no familiar name on the lists. Adams, Akron, Atwater, Baker, Braxton, Burton, Cassidy. Thank you, Lord. Neither Michael's nor Greg's name was on the list of killed, wounded, missing, or taken prisoner. As the weeks wore on, my having no contact with Michael became heavier to bear. I began to question whether not finding his name on a list meant anything. If his work was so secretive, they may keep his death or capture a secret too. I decided to go to Washington and seek some answers. The only information I needed right now was to know he was alive. I hoped they would be willing to give me that much. I rode along 17th Street behind the President's house to the 3-story brick building that housed the War Department. "I understand your concern, Miss Golden," Colonel Kelton said with equal measure sympathy and reserve. "I can reveal to you that your fiancé is alive, but that is the sum total of what I am at liberty to say." I relaxed into my chair. "That's all I need to know. Thank you so much, Colonel Kelton." As I stood, I asked, "May I come back periodically to inquire about him?" "Any time you like, Miss Golden." Miss Golden, the name by which everyone still called me. My hand moved discreetly to my blouse, beneath which, hanging from a delicate gold chain since my wedding day, rested my wedding band. After leaving the War Department office, I went to our house and let myself in with the key Michael had left for me. I needed to be near the things that were a part of him, his books, his favorite chair, the tintypes of his family on the mantelpiece. I gathered flowers from the backyard and placed them in the vases on the bedroom dresser where the lilacs had been waiting for me on our wedding day. I knew Michael would return someday, and I determined that the room would look as beautiful and smell as fragrant as the day he had left me. The war raged on. The flow of patients far exceeded our capacity, and we were forced to place less severe cases on the floor with only a straw mat on which to lie. Blankets were scarce, as were roll bandages. Our workdays and nights continued to be long and strenuous. When we thought we had given all we could, more was demanded. But it was good to be busy. It helped keep self-pity at bay. Only half of our cases were battle wounds. We treated as many diseases as injuries, including ague, measles, and diphtheria. A simple insect bite acquired in camp at times proved fatal. A triad of infections known as hospitalism, gangrene, erysipelas, and pyemia, claimed 1/5 of our patients. Nearly all the combat wounds became infected, of course, but not all were deadly, especially when maggots were available. When applied to wounds, the tiny critters instinctively feasted on rotting and decomposing flesh, but never healthy tissue. There was no pain involved with that therapy, unlike nitric acid. It was stomach-twisting to have to pour the acid on an open wound as the patient shook from the agony of searing flesh. But these measures helped prevent osteomyelitis, a chronic bone infection. Once it set in, the bone could not be saved, and many soldiers were sentenced to amputation or a prolonged, agonizing death. Certain supplies became scarce, and we were forced to improvise. The surgeons at times resorted to using horsehair, made soft and pliant through boiling, in place of silk for sutures. Cotton and linen remnants took the place of sponges for cleaning wounds, but were not reusable as the sponges were, and had to be tossed or burned after only one use. Colonel Borman and I discussed the fact that since we commenced using these contrived replenishments, our infection rate coincidentally had dropped rather significantly. I took to creating extracts that we substituted for the growing lack of available medicines. I sent for maypop root and used it as a painkiller. Bonicet helped bring down fevers, and adding yellow jasmine sometimes controlled the nervous symptoms that often accompanied the fever. Queen's root worked well for depraved blood. The soldiers shared stories of indescribable horror, miracles, and mayhem. As I instilled condensed milk through a tube into what was left of an artilleryman's stomach, he spoke of a Union man they had found hanging from an oak tree in southern Virginia. The Rebs hung a soldier? How could they do such a thing? He weren't no soldier, ma'am. He was dressed in civilian clothes, and pinned to his shirt was a paper readin', "This is what we do to Yankee spies." My heart lurched. The blood drained from my face. Them spies and saboteurs got guts, I'll tell you. Excuse my language, ma'am. I shouldn't have said guts in your company. But anyway, they're out there sneaking along blind trails or through swamps, sometimes marching right into the enemy camp with fake orders. They got a tolerable fine record of getting away with it, too. But when they get caught— He made a motion of placing a rope around his neck and pulling it taut. Every time. What little metal I had left fled from me. "I'm sorry, Miss Cassie, I've gone and upset you with such talk." "Sergeant, what did the man you found look like?" "Oh, you don't want to hear about that. He weren't none too pretty. Had been hanging for about a day, we figured. He was all bloated out." What color hair did he have?" "Dark, with a mustache." Michael could have grown one by now. Maggie showed up at my side and placed a supportive arm around my waist. I'll never forget the way his hauntin' blue eyes were staring right at us the whole while we was cutting him down and burying him. If Maggie hadn't been right there, I would have collapsed to the floor. "Sergeant," she was quick to inquire, "about how tall was this man?" "Gee, tough to say. About my height, I reckon. About 5'7". My relief was as profound as my fear had been. Michael was just over 6 feet. Maggie insisted I go out for air. Sitting on a low wall outside the back door, my arms wrapped around myself as I rocked back and forth, trying to calm my stomach and quieting my racing notions of catastrophe. Until now, I had effectively suppressed any thoughts of the consequences if Michael's duplicity were ever discovered. My last defense against living in constant fear for his safety had just crumbled. Every day I was not at the hospital was spent in our Washington home, where strong territorial feelings now swelled within me. It was winter, and with no flowers in the garden, I bought some from a greenhouse, dried them upside down to keep the color better, and placed them in vases on the bedroom dresser. Often I curled up on our parlor couch and read. I napped on our bed when fatigue caught up with me. My thoughts, as I silently roamed the house, caressing his possessions, were always the same. What it could have been like if only he hadn't been taken from me. What it will be like when he returns. The memory of his touch was strong in me. How I yearned for it to be more than just a memory. One day in mid-February, I entered the house and was struck with a queer feeling I could not explain. Everything seemed just as I had left it, yet I sat down and read from A Tale of Two Cities until my eyes no longer could focus. Having worked for 2 weeks without a day off, I was weary. I removed my hairpins while ascending the stairs. Upon entering the bedroom, my heart turned over. Lying on the nightstand was a sheet of white paper. On the pillow was a single long-stemmed red rose. Michael. He knew I had come, just as I knew when I entered the house that something was different. I snatched up the note, sat on the bed, and drew deep of the rose's fading fragrance. Through tears of renewed hope and disunited love, I began to read. My dearest Cassie, I wish I could give you a rose for every time my thoughts have turned to you since we parted. But this room, this house, this city could not contain them all. So on this Valentine's Day I shall leave just one, for the one woman who alone has captured my heart. I cannot convey my feelings of missing you more excellently than the poet. Mountains and seas divide us, but I claim no tears but tenderness to answer mine. Go where I will, to me thou art the same, a loved regret which I would not resign. There are yet 2 things in my destiny, a world to roam through and a home with thee. The first were nothing had I still the last. It were the haven of my happiness. Lord Byron. I clung to the paper, rereading the precious words. Wiping my tears, I went downstairs to the large bookshelf in the study and retrieved a volume of works by Byron and his contemporaries. I read the entire poem from which he had borrowed his sentiments, Epistle to Augusta. Retrieving a sheet of paper and a pencil from the desk drawer, I jotted down the 2 lines that immediately followed the ones he had written for me. Before leaving, I set the paper on the pillow to await his return. It was another 2 weeks before I had the opportunity to revisit the house. I went straightway upstairs to the bedroom. The note I had left on the pillow was gone. Everything else was exactly as it had always been. And that is how it remained in the months and seasons that followed. Caressing fingers smoothed out the wrinkles from the somewhat tattered piece of paper. The words written there were not unfamiliar. They had been read over and over again, sometimes by sunlight while leaning against the rail of a front porch, sometimes by moonlight in a lonely forest, or by a candle's light that pierced the darkness of an even lonelier tent. Words that brought a bittersweet aching to the heart. Words that filled only 2 lines on the paper, but which had the power to cause a tear to form in the bluest of eyes. She had been there. Many times, he was sure. She had changed the flowers, read his books, fondled his pictures, and other effects that were manifestations of who he was. She had all these things of his with which to keep him close. he had nothing of hers by which to do the same, until she left the note. After yet another silent prayer for her safety and ultimately their reunion, he slipped the paper back into the secret lining of his shirt, close to his heart, the heart that had been captured by one woman alone. But other claims and other ties thou hast, and mine is not the wish to make them less.
As they once promised each other, their love is being sustained despite their separation. Michael seems big on leaving fitting poetry for Cassie to read, and this time she was able to use the words of Lord Byron to reiterate for him that she understands and fully supports the other claims and other ties that he has. For how long? Let's see if we find that out in an upcoming episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share if you would. See you next time.